Hey everyone, welcome to video number 2 in my series on how to use Excel for graphing in high school science, especially in high school physics. In this video I'm going to show you how to properly format your tables and your graphs so that everything looks nice in your Excel file. So let's get started by looking at the table. Now there's a couple of things we're going to need to do here. One thing I want to do first off is to work with, here we go. To work with these time values. One thing we absolutely need to make sure of is that all the decimal places are the same. So I want to change them to all have the same decimal place. In this version of in this version of Excel, all the options for formatting my cells live in what's called the toolbox. We're looking for the type of format for the cell. Now, there's a couple of ways to get to that. One way is to right-click and choose Format Cells, or in this version you can go over to the Formatting palette. If you have some more recent versions, it might be up in the ribbon. It depends on your version. You'll have to use Help to look up where that is. I want to change this to number, and that's going to that's going to change that into a number. Now the number format has them all have the same decimal place, and you can add more decimals with this button or add less decimals with this button. You'll have to determine how to do that properly. I think 3 decimal places should be enough. All right. And we can do the same thing for the distance. The benefit of this is that if you do this, the best time to do this actually is just before you put your data, or before you copy your data over to Word, because this way everything will have the same number of decimal places before you copy it, and you won't have to edit all the numbers by hand. Okay. So there we go. All right, that's good. Now, one other thing that I want to do actually is to move this data away from where it is right now. I want to separate out my raw data and my process data. So I'm going to pick it up and drag it over here. All of the formulas will update. What I did was I selected all the cells, and I put my mouse cursor on the edge. When it changes to a hand, I can pick it up and drag it over. I can actually drag this over to a whole different side here, because I'm going to try something else. Sometimes you might want to make a new table but keep some of the same columns. Like here I have dot and time. I want those to all be the same. I can copy and paste them over. That's one way to do it. But the way I prefer to do it is to use a cell reference using a formula. What this will do is anytime I change the original cell, I change anything that's based on it. So if I make this have as its formula equals A1, if I change A1 to, let's say, spot, then G1 over here changes to spot as well. If I change it, they change back. And then I just need to do it once, and I can drag this over with the fill handle to fill that in, and it does the same thing for here. Now this is B1, it's exactly the same spot, and then I drag this one down, and I drag this one. Oh, hold on. Before I do that, autofill options. This is copy cells. No, we'll keep that the same. I'll have to adjust the formatting of these later. So I want these to be numbers, so I'm going to change those to number, give them one more decimal point. That's good. Now they're all the same. So that just separated out my my raw data and my process data, so when I copy it over, it'll make 2 process data tables. Or I can copy it over as 2 tables. Raw data table and a process data table without having to mess around with things. One thing you also need to do is where you also need to think about how you're going to put in uncertainty. For the distances, I might find out that uncertainty is different each time. So if your uncertainty is different, if your uncertainty is the same for, like, let's say it's plus minus a small amount of time, but it's the same for all the time values, I can put that at the top of my header. If it's different for each one, then I'm going to need a column for it. And in the column, I can put in different values for each one. So that says 0.01, and this is 0.001, but this one is 0.02. This is going to get all my uncertainties. It's very important to have this, especially when you're graphing, because you're going to need to be able to use that to create what are called error bars. Now you'll see that in the third video in this series, but it's best to start putting those in now. You can also use this to calculate the uncertainty. Usually in your raw data you won't need to do this, but you won't need to do this sort of thing, but it might show up over here in the uncertainty. All right, so that's it for formatting your tables. Make sure to have them be in everything in number format. Oh, no, should be in number format. There we go. And try to separate out your tables and use formulas to essentially copy a cell so that these cells are now linked. The next thing you want to do is format your graph. It's very important to have the proper formatting on your graph. If you don't, you can actually lose, if you're doing, for my students who are IB, you can really hurt yourself, hurt your marks in the IB labs by leaving out these things. And you know, that's actually true for all science lab reports. Teachers want to see that you've got a properly formatted graph that looks good and tells you at a glance what it's actually showing you. So there's a couple of things you're going to need. I'm going to actually start by one thing that isn't necessarily, it isn't something you always need to do, but I usually like doing this. This chart is very small right now, and it's just part of a page. We can actually move that to its own page so it fills the entire page. So what I do with that, to do that, is I click on the chart, right-click somewhere in the background. Oh, it's being a little slow. I right-click on the background, and I choose Move Chart. It's going to open up an option. I say New Sheet. Now I can name it something if I want to. I'm just going to call it Chart 2. And then I click OK. And now it's on its own nice big sheet all by itself. Makes it much easier to work with because everything is going to be much bigger, further apart. It's not, you won't have one thing on top of another thing, making it hard to click on something. It's much better this way. I believe actually if you try to copy this over, it'll have more higher resolution when you copy it as a picture, like we did in our previous video. So that can actually help it look much better in Word. All right. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is add a title. Again, how you add your title depends on your version of Excel. In this version of Excel, the titles are all over here. So I want to have a title. This is, usually your titles, you want to talk about what are the two variables that you're graphing and what it's for. So this is velocity versus time of a kinematics cart. Kinematics cart. That's going to tell me, that tells me what I have right here. I have velocity versus time of a kinematics cart. Makes sense. Next, I want to give the axis labels. This will tell what each axis is showing. So the vertical axis is this one here on the left. That's our y-axis. And that one is in velocity, which is in meters per second. There we go. So I've shown what it's measuring and what the units are. You must always show these two. And I do the same thing for the horizontal axis down here at the bottom. It's our x-axis, and this is time in seconds. So those are the two axes. And the next thing we want to do, next thing we might want to do is add some more grid lines. Over here, the grid lines live here. And typically, Excel will give us just horizontal lines. Really, for a science graph, we should have horizontal lines and vertical lines. So I'm going to add those here. And I'm actually going to add the major and the minor grid lines. The major grid lines are the darker ones that actually have a number below them. The minor ones are these ones here. Let's see, what else? So we got the grid lines, the axis. Oh, axis scale. Sometimes you might want to adjust the scale of the axis. This doesn't typically happen. Usually the scale of your axis, or the scale that it automatically gives you, is good enough. But if you ever need to change it, you'll need to click on the axis, right-click, then go to Format Axis. Format Axis, there's a couple of things you can adjust. How it's filled, what the line looks like, shadows, fonts. Let's see, there's number. This is good if your numbers have way too much in terms of if your numbers are way too long, they're showing too many decimal places, you want to adjust them. You can adjust the decimal places over here. You can, normally they're linked to source. In other words, they show the same as their source does. What you can do is uncheck this and reduce that. So I just eliminated one decimal place from each one of them. And I could do the same on the, I could do the same thing on this axis. You might want to also change the scale. This scale will tell you what the lowest possible value, 0, is, and the maximum possible value, that's 0.35, what the major unit is, in other words, how far apart are the numbers, what the minor unit is, that's how far apart these blocks are, and where does the vertical axis cross at. Normally that's going to be 0. There may be a time in which you need to change that for some reason. I'm not sure what it would be, but that's where it is. Display units, okay. And you can also change what the tick marks look like. So there's a bunch of things you can change there with how the ticks are set up. Let's see, I'm going to turn off that legend. So it's got that turned off, so that's fine. Let's see, so we change the grid lines, where the grid lines are, and you can change how long the axis is. Now there's also, you can change these point markers. If I right-click, I can format the data series itself. Now this is going to give me a bunch of options I can do. One of the ones I wanted to show you was marker style. You can change what the markers actually look like. These big diamonds are kind of large, and it can be hard, especially on a smaller graph, to see where the point actually is. So I actually like something more like these X's. And change the fill. You can make them larger or smaller. So you can have them be really big X's, or you can have them be much smaller X's. Or you can just take that same automatic one. Oh, not the automatic one. I could change it to this one and just keep the same type and make it a little bit smaller, maybe 4 pixels big. Now it's much smaller, so it's easier to see where the spot actually is rather than seeing, very large dots. Much easier to visualize that way. All right, I think that's basically it. That's all the formatting you really need to worry about. This looks like a nice graph here. In the next video, we're going to show one more thing to add to this, but it's the trend line, or the line of best fit. That's a bit more involved, so we'll leave that out for now. But that's it for now. So thanks for watching.